population I work with in East LA. Many of these kids had prediabetes, or they had metabolic syndrome or some comorbidity of their obesity. So the idea was, this was a randomized pilot study. We had 14 or 15 in each group. The control group got a lifestyle education, so they got 12 classes teaching how to eat very healthily and how to be more physically active. And the intervention group down there at the bottom got that same 12 sessions of lifestyle class, and then they got 12 sessions of one-on-one guided imagery. So it would start with what I just did with you. For instance, we do 3 sessions of strictly stress reduction guided imagery. And we actually didn't go to the comfortable place until the second session. The first session was just the breath work, okay? And then at the end, our main outcomes were, well, what happened to cortisol levels, stress, the biomarker for stress, during the, both during the imagery sessions and pre and post the 12-week intervention. I'll tell you right now, we didn't see any changes pre-post 12 weeks in the measures we measured cortisol, but I'll show you what happens to stress cortisol, what might have just happened to your stress cortisol in just 2 minutes. And I'll show you the behavior. We got an effect on physical activity, so I'll show you that. So this is the effect on cortisol. So this is showing the change in salivary cortisol over we did a 20-minute guided, 25-minute stress reduction imagery, just like I just showed you. 3 sessions, session 1, session 2, session 3. The black bar is the decrease in the imagery group, the group that got the stress reduction. So starting from baseline, taken to 0, they dropped almost 0.2 micrograms per deciliter, and the open bars are the control group. So in the same period of time, these were actually measured about 40 to 45 minutes apart. So before we did the guided imagery, we measured cortisol, and then after. And so we saw about almost a 40% reduction in cortisol in the guided imagery group at each of the 3 sessions, highly significant, versus the group that did not do the imagery. So if any of you opted out of just doing that exercise, your cortisol right now is higher than the rest of us. Right? Or maybe mine's higher because I didn't get to really get into my own. Although I usually do when I'm doing that, what I just did with you guys, I'm usually trying to go to my own comfortable place as well. Okay, and then the other thing we did was use guided imagery to motivate behavior change. This gets into a little bit what you were just saying about EMDR, because some of the imagery we did, and I was talking with somebody at dinner also, for physical activity, the first exercise we did was imagine yourself being physically active. So we didn't tell the kids what to do. We didn't say, see yourself running, see yourself, whatever. It was a physical activity image that was their own. And then they could explore it. How does it feel to be doing that? What are you doing? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? And that's where the facilitation of the imagery comes in. When we do what I just did as a group, I don't know where you are in your image. It's all, I'm blinded to what's happening to you. But if I'm working with you one-on-one, you're kind of in your image, and we're actually dialoguing. Tell me where you are. What are you doing? Oh, I'm running up a mountain. Oh, cool. How steep is it? What is it? And then you really get into it. How does it feel? You feel your muscles move. You feel the blood pumping. How does that feel in your body? Oh, I feel great. I feel tired. Whatever. So anyway, again, the dark bars are the guided imagery group, and the light bars control. So in the sedentary behavior, so these were surveys pre and post 12-week intervention. How much time did the kids spend sitting watching TV, basically, in their 24-hour day? And that was significantly reduced in the guided imagery, and the moderate physical activity, the dark bar, was significantly increased. So they traded some TV for some moderate, a little bit of vigorous activity, but not too much. But both the decrease in sedentary behavior and the increase in moderate activity were significant. A small pilot study. I'll tell you, I just got the funding for an RR1 to extend this big time in an after-school program in East LA. So literally last week. So we're super excited to take this to the next step, which will be the definitive study. So, okay, so that was called the Imagine Health study. And health stood for healthy eating, active living, total health. Total health meaning the stress reduction and integration. So, okay, so that's for prediabetes or diabetes risk. Now what's the data out there for mind-body therapies for diabetes itself? So when I first made this slide, it was up to 2007. I have some more studies to show you. Nobody's ever shown adverse effects, first of mind-body intervention. So that's very important. You're going to do no harm, Hippocratic oath, okay? With perhaps the 1 in 1,000 who gets anxious when you go into stress reduction. But the truth of the matter is that's totally workable, and you can work around it and get beyond that, if you would. So a number of these studies have shown either fasting glucose or hemoglobin A1C is improved. And these are several different mind-body modalities, and I'll show you some of these. Some of these data is the ones that I think are perhaps the strongest. But you can see at the bottom that, you know, most of these were small. You know, there's no big pharmaceutical company paying millions of dollars to prove that their drug works, so it's hard to get adequate funding. So we still need, you know, a lot more. So, okay. So this is MBSR. Anyone heard of mindfulness-based stress reduction? In the mind-body world, this is the one that's hit in the literature, you know, big time. This was mindfulness-based stress reduction was taken by John Kabat-Zinn at Harvard, and it's basically a secularized form. It comes from Buddhist meditation, but he secularized it, so it takes out the Buddhist spiritual approach, if you would, and he packaged it. You know, he standardized it so that you deliver. People who do MBSR interventions generally will do an 8-week program where they teach people how to be mindful, basically. So it typically involves meditation, paying attention to what's going on in your body, the sounds around, and then they teach basically affect regulation. So instead of responding immediately, like if you hear a noise, you go, oh, that's a noise, okay. I can keep breathing and be comfortable through that noise. You know, at least this is my understanding of it. I've never actually practiced it. I've gone through a couple of guided examples of it, similar to what I just did with you all, although what I do is not specifically this, but I've had people who do MBSR do it to me, and it's kind of like that, just kind of paying attention to where you are, about moment-to-moment awareness, which is very Buddhist, if you know anything about Buddhism. So, okay, so they did the 8-week program, and this was a pilot study. Again, this was small. I think they only had 11 adults, and these were adults with type 2, okay? So they lowered their A1C significantly. The delta is, for those of you who know statistics, is called an effect size. So an effect size, typically above 0.7 is considered quite large. Certainly above 0.8 is large. So they got a large effect, and it was statistically significant. Lowered blood pressure, and again, in terms of the psycho-emotional whole person approach, got beneficial effects from a lot of the psychosocial measures that they checked. Depression, which is a big one in adults with type 2, there's a high prevalence of depression, anxiety, and just general distress were all significantly lower.
Were they doing any other type of basic education, or was it strictly this program?
It was just this program, yeah. Okay, so this one was just published last year, so this is a bigger study of mindfulness-based stress reduction done in Germany. I think it's Heidelberg, I think they have a typo there. 100 adults randomized, and these were adults who already had albuminuria, so they're starting to show maybe some signs of incipient nephropathy. And they actually didn't get an effect on their albumin, but I don't think that was the main outcome. Again, the 8-week program, and then they did a booster program at 6 months, and they measured outcomes at 1 year. Okay, so it was much longer term. They had a measure of overall health and wellness, and they improved that. Lowered depression, lowered stress. It was borderline in terms of its statistical significance, but again, the effect size was pretty strong. Diastolic blood pressure. Oops, the XX and the YY. I meant to go back and fill in the numbers. I apologize. My recollection is that the A1C was improved around somewhat. Oh, I know what it was. It was almost 1% in those who completed the intervention. So there's a couple different ways to look at this. They looked at everybody who started, even those who didn't finish. They got a borderline improvement. For those who really went through when they did the analysis on just the people who completed the intervention, they showed a statistically significant lowering of A1C, and I think it was in the range of 1%. I don't remember exactly, so sorry about that. And this was another one-year study using, they called stress management. What this was just the breath work we just did, and what's called progressive muscle relaxation, which I didn't really do with you. I had you do like a muscle scan, see if you have any tense areas, blow the breath there. Progressive muscle relaxation just does that in a much more consistent way. Starting with the face, you like scrunch up your face, relax. Scrunch up your shoulders, relax. And that's kind of a phase you go through. And then they also threw in a little guided imagery, mental imagery. So it was kind of a mixed bag, but they called it stress management. And the black dots are the control group, and the white dots are the stress management group. About 100, there's 60 in the stress management group, 48 adults in the control group. The control group did not really change their, the red line indicates the statistical line that's drawing, when you get the actual data points, they're kind of like this, versus the green line. When you run the stats, these are the lines that are generated and show a statistically significant lowering in the stress management group, and you'll note that it was only at the 12-month point, really. So it was, in the short term, they really didn't see any change, but as these people kept going over time, they really lowered their, this was hemoglobin A1C. Yes?
Are they oral type 2s or insulin taking?
Can you remember, most of these people were on oral,
Okay.
yes, oral agents. Yes, I'll talk about type 1 in a moment.
So the doctors can drive a lot
Yeah.
of patients almost daily injections, so.
Yeah. Okay. And the level of improvement, I think the average improvement in A1C here was about 0.5%, but it says 32%, a third of the participants lowered it by 1%. So, that's comparable to adding another drug, to adding whatever, pioglitazone on top of your metformin or something like that. You'll get about a 1 to 2% lowering in your A1C every time you add a new diabetes drug. So, and this was a cool one. I actually just found this just before and added this slide just today. This is from Duke. Duke has a really active program in integrated medicine and mind-body. And they have developed this program they call integrative health coaching, where people are trained, and these are not necessarily medically like physicians or nurses, although they can be, but generally in this study they were like master's level people who had an interest, taught how to do health coaching, right? And so the integrative health coaching they did on the telephone. Basically what they worked with what they call the wheel of health. And so the content was, they worked with, again, this was adults with type 2. They worked with these adults on exercise, nutrition. This was the wheel. These were the kind of areas they would work with them and coach them in. And what they did was, in each of these areas, they would tell them, create a vision of health for you in this area. So what do you look like when you're healthy and physically active? What does that look like for you? And then they would coach them in setting goals and coaching them through that, okay? And then same thing with nutrition, same thing with, what's your current stress reduction practice? Oh, you don't have one. Well, what would that look like? How do you want to reach that? So basically all of their kind of psychosocial, a lot of their psychosocial outcomes improve stress, medical adherence, the pills they were also in orals, frequency of exercise, and they also got a reduction in A1C, and this was in diabetes educator in 2010. This was also a small pilot study. So again, these studies are, to get the funding to do big studies is challenging. Okay, so what about type 1 diabetes and stress? Okay, so we've known for a long time, like I said, when I was in my fellowship, back in the, I won't tell you what decade, but it was really clear, that family stress, psychosocial stress, the kids with the chronic psychosocial stressors are the ones who have the highest A1Cs. We've known that for forever, basically. So it could be that psychosocial stress is affecting their ability to manage their diabetes, so poor adherence, skipping insulin, not checking sugar, therefore they don't know how much insulin to take, etc. So that's one mechanism. But there actually is data out there suggesting that psychosocial stress may have a direct effect on glycemic control that's independent of their health behaviors. So, and this gets back to one of the earlier slides I showed you about how stress, hypes up the renal axis, the autonomic nervous system axis. And any of us who manage kids with diabetes, we know there's a couple of kids who are just, really, easily stressed and very hard to control blood sugars and et cetera. Okay, so I think some of that is going on. So what we did some studies recently in the last year and a half, 2 years in young adults. So these are 18, most of these young people were 18 to 21, but I think up to maybe 23. And they entered a transition program. So we had a transition program for young adults, so how to move them from the pediatric clinic into adult clinics ultimately in such a way that their diabetes control didn't suffer, they didn't lose contact with their healthcare providers. This issue of transitioning teenagers into adult care, medical care for their diabetes is a big issue, big hot issue right now in the diabetes movement. So Beth Piatek, who's actually an occupational therapist, and her husband has type 1, so she's really interested in working, how do you work from an occupational therapist mindset, which if you don't know it, most of us think of occupational therapy as the people who help in stroke rehab and that sort of thing, moving limbs and stuff like that, but really what they're about is what they consider occupations is the way you spend your everyday life, what you do every day and how you orient your time and stuff. So Beth's idea is how you can take an occupational therapy approach to diabetes, to type 1, and help people negotiate their way through their lifestyle a little better and control their, be in more balance with their diabetes. So she did a nice interview study. She's very big on qualitative methodology, and this actually just came out published in print this month in Diabetic Medicine, and just showed that the number of life stressors she went in the interviews went through with the people. I mean, some major life stressors. Some of these are kids, young people that we take care of, and some of them were, had been, pregnant, incarcerated, single parent homes, whatever, dropped out of school. And some of them just had the common everyday stressors that we all have too. But the more, it was very clear in her data that the more life stressors they reported, the higher their hemoglobin A1C. And also when we did a survey measure, the validated survey measure of perceived stress, in other words, how much stress did they perceive in their life in the last month, the survey asked, on a scale of 1 to 5 basically. And the higher stress that they were perceiving in their life, the higher their A1C. The correlation was 0.2, not quite as strong as in her interviews, but it was nonetheless significant. Okay, so we have some signal there that stress is affecting the glucose control in these adolescents and young adults with type 1. Okay, and then what some of these kids, and this was a part of the intervention that I led. You can see me there with our group. This is actually a little bit of a posed shot, but it's okay. This is what we do. We used a facilitated group process called counsel. And now this has been secularized, if you would, from indigenous methods, both in this continent, again, the Native American experience, but this counsel is used worldwide by almost every people throughout the world in terms of how do you make decisions. So if you think about, the Council of Elders coming together, basically, and how do you come to a decision? And I don't know, looking at our Congress these days, I think they can use a little help in figuring out how to talk to each other. And really, I only half joke, because that really is what this is all about. It's really about how do you exist in community with people and be very real, and not hide behind the things we're afraid and to be vulnerable and stuff like that, and therefore get to the places that need healing. Because if you can get real, you can heal. You just coined that phrase. I'll have to write that down. All right. So how do you do counsel? And this, by the way, counsel has been, as I say, secularized. A very good book by Zimmerman and Coyle called Way of Counsel. I think it was 2000. I put that on there. I meant to double check that, but it was around there. There's an organization called the Ojai Foundation. Ojai is a town west of, northwest of LA, kind of between LA and Santa Barbara. And they've developed this way of counsel, and it's now in the schools in LA. I have a very good friend who has taken this into the LA Unified School District, and there's a whole program there. They've shown improvement in grades, improvement in class behaviors in those classrooms that are using this methodology. They teach the teachers how to do it, basically in the classroom. So you sit in a circle so that everybody can see everybody's face, and everybody is directly in relation with everybody. And it also immediately gets rid of the hierarchy. So, you know, we have a hierarchy here. I'm looking at you, and you're all looking at me. And, you know, there's a certain way that communication happens there that is very different and very structured, that is different when you're in a circle. I couldn't figure out how to do a PowerPoint in a circle, so I figured we better do it this way. We typically use a talking piece. Now what that means, it can be a stick, it can be, in this case, I don't know if you can see it, this young man here, this young guy has a stone, a rock in his hand right there. All right? So whoever has the talking piece is the only one allowed to speak. So it empowers the speaker. Very simple little ritual method, you know. If I have the stone or the stick, I can talk and you can't. Now what do you do when you're not talking? You have to listen, okay? So no crosstalk in the circle. So the speaker is empowered to speak from the heart, and that's the instruction. Speak really what you really feel. And the listeners have to actively listen. Also described as listen from the heart, so empathetic listening. Can you imagine John Boehner and Obama doing this? I mean, you know. Speak leanly, meaning briefly. Only say what you really need to say. Because if you think about it, in most conversations, like within 20 seconds, you kind of get the point. You know, and a lot of people go on and on and on, and you kind of go, all right, Brady, I got it. So keep it focused, keep it to the point, and speak spontaneously, meaning when others are speaking, you're not like in your head thinking about what you want to say, you're listening to them, you know. And then when it comes to you, to the talking piece, then whatever's present for you at that moment, you say. Maybe, you know, 2 people ago you were going to say something else, but now it's gone, you can't remember what it was. Fine, say what's there right then, because that's what needs to be said right now. So this is how we do it, and everything's confidential in the circle. All right? When in council, whatever happens in council stays in council. And then within the circle, we did a lot of these mind-body integrative, I call them holistic modalities. We did some of the guided imagery that I just did with you, the stress reduction. We used a lot of holistic ways to engage the youth: poetry, music, writing journals, interactive games, narrative storytelling. Okay. Human beings are beings of story. We like to hear each other's story. So telling personal stories, I mean, very powerful when these young people would tell each other the story of their diagnosis, the story of when they decided to test whether they really needed insulin or not, and ended up back in the hospital with ketoacidosis, you know, and how ashamed they were of that or something. And, you know, being able to tell that was really cathartic. And not only personal stories, but using universal stories, so mythic stories. So, you know, most people think myth means a falsehood, but really in the story version, myth is really the deeper truth. The mythic stories, and this we read rather than Greek, you know, legends of other peoples, are really talking about sort of archetypal truths of the human condition. So when we told I actually used a Native American story in this council the story's called The Jumping Mouse, from one of the Plains Indian tribes. And basically the youth are able to see themselves as all the characters in the story. And the character in the story goes through a certain challenge. And then relating that, like we did in the wilderness trip, to their challenges with diabetes and bringing up discussion about that. Okay? So the discussion topics in the circle were both specific about diabetes, but then also about life in general. So we didn't come in and say, okay, today we're going to talk about carb counting, today we're going to, but when carb counting came up, there would be discussion about it. And the discussion would be very, you know, significant and heartfelt and all that sort of stuff. So this next slide, so this is just some of the quotes, just to share some of the qualitative stuff. Everybody really loved the program. And some of this, we're writing up this data right now. I presented this at the American Diabetes Association last June, and I'm you were saying, Susan, need time to write the manuscript. It's like, I have a plane ride coming up at the end of October, that's when these things written. I shared very personal stories, and it was because I trusted the group, I felt comfortable. Nobody felt like they were more important than the other people, they all felt equal. This is what I liked about it. So again, that non-hierarchical aspect of being in the circle. It really increased the relatedness, the connections between group members. I felt empowered, we all told our stories, and I would think, well, what would they say? What would their advice be? This person was talking about when she was out in her life, like thinking about being back in the circle. And I feel like they're with me, and I can do it because of that, so I can move forward. So to feel safe in the group, to be able to get input in stuff without even having to ask. Like, I need you guys' input. I need your opinion. It was nice to not have to ask. So just some of the feedback. This is a complicated slide. This is kind of the model we gave. How does this work? Each of these points is one of the council sessions. And so at this one, they learn stress reduction, let's just say, for example. And then they go out in their life, and they come back next week, and we learn it again. Then they go out in their life, and they use it out in their real life. You know, kind of reinforce what happened in the circle, in the council. And so then when they came back, they were even more empowered. They got another dose of it, if you would, went out, started using it more. You know, and so we kind of saw this as this spiral of expanding the experience from the inner circle out into the world. One girl told the story of how she came back and her mother was on her case about something, and she just did active listening, you know, listening from the heart, and instead of responding immediately, which is what she would do with her mother, and just, you know, shared how that totally changed the interaction that they had. As an example, I'm going to skip all those diagrams and slides. I guess all I would say is we think that it's working because we support autonomy, we support stress, we work on stress reduction, and we support the connection, the connectedness. And we think what's happening in terms of our outcomes is the people experience more acceptance or integration of diabetes into their overall life experience. It's changing the way they're relating to others, like I just shared with you about how the one girl related to her mother. And it's changing their motivation for different health behaviors. So testing more often. For instance, you know, not forgetting to take the insulin, and getting to new activities, new behaviors, which hopefully would lead to good health benefits. So what did we see at the end of the intervention? A significant drop after we did 12 council sessions over a period of about 9 months, about every 3 weeks we met. And so participants in the group versus a control group that did not participate in the group. Perceived stress is where we got the significant difference. In the participants, at the end of the intervention, their stress score had come down 9 points, and the non-participants had come down 1 point. And again, getting over here in the far right column, effect size, an effect size of 0.7 being considered large. This was a very, very large effect size. A1C came down in the participant group by 0.5%. You notice they started off very high versus the control group. This was not, between the groups it's not statistically different, but there was a modest effect size difference of 0.26. We did not see differences in diabetes competence, which is they're feeling competent about their ability to take care of their diabetes. We were surprised by that, and we actually did not see differences in their feeling supported in their autonomy. We may not have had the right scales. We're looking into, if we're going to do this again, what other measures there might be that might detect that maybe what we tried to measure wasn't the right one or wasn't sensitive. So, now this was interesting in that I showed you that their perceived stress came down and their A1C came down, and when we looked at the relationship between those two things, there was a significant relationship in that the lower their perceived stress came down, the lower their A1C came down. So you know, those two things tended to correlate. So that was a very interesting finding, and that's, I think, where we are. So to summarize then, we think stress can have adverse effects on both types of diabetes, and the data, I think, supports that. The data in older adults with type 2 supports some of our mind-body or integrative therapies, and I think our pilot data suggests that mind-body interventions are good for our young people. I'm hoping to take this from the young adult clinic into our adolescent clinic. And several of the young adults who went through the program want to be mentors for the high school kids now in our clinic, so that's very exciting. So I think I'll stop there. If I'm not mistaken, that's the last slide. And take any discussion. I'm really open to if anyone has any ideas how this might interact